All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 289, and today I want to talk about combat. I needed to drink first, and if anybody has no idea what exactly that was I was singing, that's a song by Ron Wasserman called Combat that used to be played during fight scenes during the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and it is my favorite Power Rangers fight song. So, um, so today I was glancing through Reddit, as you do. And one of the things I've started doing is once I start getting really into a tabletop RPG, I check to see if there's a subreddit for it. Like last year, when I got really into Fabula Ultima, I went and I found the subreddit. I also went and I found the official Discord that's run by the guy that creates Fabula Ultima. And so now that I'm doing Lancer for my KKK campaign this December, I started. I joined the Lancer subreddit and just started reading different things. And a post on there kind of inspired this of a video. The post itself, without going into too much specifics, the post itself was basically kind of complaining about the lack of role-playing opportunities in combat. If you guys watched my video about TTRPGs that are not D&D, I did a little section on the on Lancer, and in particular I mentioned what they call their sit reps, which are basically just different styles of combat encounters that you can use. And the thing with Lancer in and of itself is the game is very segmented. What I mean by that is your skills, like you would have in a more traditional RPG, are called triggers. And the triggers can be like one of the example triggers I mentioned in there was applies fists to face. So they generally tend to be these little phrases that describe things that your character does often or does well. And so you can have, gets around without being seen, or bypasses security, stuff like that. If you want to have a kind of more traditional rogue style character. But the thing about it is, for the most part, your skills are used when you are in pilot mode, when you're not in your mech. And when you're in your mech, for the most part, you're going to be using your mech skills. Hull, what are they again? I can't remember, 'cause my brain is broken. Core book, let's do that. So, the mech. So mech skills are hull, agility, systems, and engineering. So effectively, whenever you're in your mech, you're really never going to use any of your triggers, because your triggers are mostly designed to be things that you do when you're just your pilot. And if you're using your mech to do it, then you have to roll one of those four mech skills. Hull is effectively your physical skill. Roll hull when smashing through or pulverizing obstacles, vehicles, or buildings, lifting, dragging, pushing, or hurling an enormous amount of weight, grappling or wrestling mechs, starships, or mech-sized creatures, resisting a huge amount of force, or staying upright in cataclysmic weather. So again, that's basically your strength score. Agility, basically your dexterity score. Systems is going to be your technology score. So it might be equivalent to either intelligence or uh, intelligence or wisdom, but it's basically any time that you're using kind of technology. And then engineering is basically either when you're trying to fix your mech or you're trying, I'm giving her all she's got, Captain, where you're pushing your mechs far beyond its limits. It's literally your knowledge of engineering and how mechs work and using that to get your mech to do something. So because of that, Lancer can feel very, very segmented, because when you are playing your pilot and wandering around as your pilot, you are using a completely different set of skills and basically a different character sheet than when you are in your mech. And for the most part, the only time you are in your mech is in combat. And so this particular player was kind of lamenting the fact that once combat started, they kind of felt like they threw their character away and now they're just playing a tactical RPG. And as much as, that is kind of a quote-unquote Lancer problem, because again, you have a completely separate character sheet that you use when you're in combat that you generally don't use when you're not. I mean, your pilot actually can jump out of their mech and run around the battlefield, and your pilot does have their own pilot-sized weapons and stuff like that. So your pilots can get into combat without their mechs, but it's not common, especially since, again, most combat involves mechs, and mechs are big and pilots are small. So it kind of like being it's kind of like being just a regular human running around with a bunch of like Gundams. Can you do something to them? Absolutely. Is it going to be hyper effective? Not really. Not when you also have your own Giga Gundam. And so the player was kind of lamenting the fact that every time combat started, they went from playing a character to trying to beat the game. And they really, really didn't like that, because it felt like they lost their character. And I have seen that in other tabletop RPGs as well, where as soon as you roll initiative, everything changes. You are no longer your character. You're no longer Billy the Paladin who fights injustice and everything. You are now undead killer with a greatsword, because that's what you do in combat. And even in something like D&D, the rules for combat and the rules for social encounters and stuff like that are very, very different. And again, once initiative is rolled, I know a lot of people that don't do anything other than try to, beat the encounter once initiative is rolled. So I don't think this is a uniquely Lancer problem, though Lancer is a good example of the kind of epitome of that problem, because again, it's so easy to go, well, you're in your mech, now you're in kill mode. Whereas in other things, you don't have a completely separate character sheet for combat. You just play differently in combat. So I wanted to talk about something that I actually learned in theater, remarkably enough, about the role of combat in storytelling. A lot of people, especially when you're looking at something like film, you'll have these kind of gratuitous action scenes that really serve no purpose other than to go, ooh, pretty explosions. And while that can be fun, it's really not that great. And really well-written action movies, every bit of combat has a purpose, helps to move the story along. It's not just plot, 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 plot. Okay, now we throw everything out the window, we throw explosions at you, and then after it's done, go plot, 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 plot. That's a poorly written movie. The same thing goes about stage combat and theater in general. I took some stage combat lessons, and then I started learning how to fight direct. And I actually got to do some fight direction a couple different times. And I really, really enjoy fight direction in stage combat. And one of the most important aspects of a fight scene is the fight scene has to tell a story. The fight scene in and of itself has to move the plot along in some way, shape, or form. And unlike a scene with dialogue where you can use the words and the emotions of the actors, a combat scene for the most part is going to be entirely movement based. And so in order for you to still be able to tell a story, you have to really understand the medium of movement in general. You have to understand conflict. You have to understand combat in and of itself. And what really, really helps is understanding the characters that are going into the combat. Like you have one character that's very laid back and relaxed, and they're forced into a combat situation, then a lot of the moves that character should be making should be made from a relaxed perspective, a very kind of roll with it kind of perspective. And if they don't, that should be that should tell you something about the character. If everywhere else in the show the character is very, very laid back, and then once fists start flying, they change into a completely different person, that should be something that's acknowledged somewhere else. And the fight scene might be the catalyst that that allows the characters to kind of explore that aspect of the character. And the same is true about, the antagonist or the villain in that particular combat encounter. The way that they fight, the things that they do should say something about them. If they're supposed to be a bad person, then they should fight dirty. They should do things that make people kind of understand that this is not a good person. Whereas if you're trying to make them, a more kind of noble enemy, they should do that. If you watch something like Serenity, the operative in that, you get significantly more information about the character and their motivations from how they fight people and what happens during a fight scene than you ever do in the bits of dialogue that they just are speaking to different people. And part of that has to do with the fact is that they're always talking, which is the thing we'll talk about in a second here. So let's go back to tabletop RPGs. A lot of people that I know that play tabletop RPGs will treat combat like an old school JRPG where story happens, and then you get the and then the boss music starts. And then you see the menu pop up, and you're like, oh, we're in combat. Now we don't have to worry about doing anything because it's combat. And I don't think that's right. When we look at other forms of entertainment, that's not how fight scenes work. At least not the good ones. Go back to Serenity. The operative is talking all the time. And they're having conversations while they're throwing punches at each other. And even in a scene like when the Reavers are basically trying to overrun the rest of the crew of Serenity, the crew is talking to each other. And you can see, like, when Zoe gets up and just starts going like ham with her gun and everything like that, like, the reason she's doing that is because, spoiler alert, she just lost her husband. She was very upset, and you can actually see in her eyes she kind of accepted that she's about to die, and so she was going to go out swinging. None of that is explained with dialogue. Like, she doesn't get up like, I am so sad my husband died. Pow, pow. I don't care if I die now. Pow, pow. But I'm going to take them down with me. Pow, 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 pow. Slice. No, you can see it in the actions that she takes, she gets out from behind the barricades. She starts slowly moving forward. She has this extremely determined look on her face. That's what good combat can do. It pushes the story forward. It allows you to see different aspects of the character. And going back to tabletop RPGs, if you always have what I call silent combat, you are doing yourself a huge disservice as a game master. If as soon as initiative is rolled, none of your enemies communicate, or none of the bad guys communicate with the good guys in any way, shape, or form, you're doing yourself a huge disservice, because that is generally the longest part of most sessions is going to be combat. If you divide your sessions up into scenes, like a lot of more modern tabletop RPGs do, the longest scenes you will ever have are going to be combat scenes. And if you're wasting your combat scenes, hours sometimes of playtime with nothing involving plot and everything just like, let's see how much hit points we can get rid of, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. When you are throwing combat at your players, it should be to move the story forward in some way, shape, or form. It could be that they came up against effectively an immovable object. There are bad guys that are preventing them from moving forward, and so the players decide that the easiest way to move forward is to attack these people. That's great, but that doesn't mean as soon as the first punch is to the thrown that everybody forgets that the world exists outside of there. The enemies should be bare minimum, like if their purpose is to stop the players, which is very, very rare, that the purpose of the antagonist is just to seek out and kill the players. Normally it's like, well, we want to stop them from doing this or this. So if their purpose is to stop the players, yes, killing them will stop them, but it's just as easy to stop them by discouraging them. And so having your enemies taunt the players is a viable strategy. And we see this constantly in entertainment. I mean, look at like most of Jedi versus Sith combat in literally any Star Wars medium. The Sith is always taunting the Jedi. With a few very rare exceptions. I think the Darth Maul fight from Episode 1 is, I think, the only time I can ever remember there being a truly silent combat. And there were so many other things that were going on there that it was still telling a very intriguing story. They just weren't using any dialogue to do it. But look at Count Dooku. Every time he fights someone, he's constantly throwing little jabs in that. It's actually, this is a fun little fact, it's actually a fighting style. It's a Sith fighting style. If you really get into, I guess it's Legends canon now. I don't know if it's actually canon anymore. But if you actually start looking into it, I can't remember. I think it might have been called Dune Mach or something akin to that. But basically, one of the techniques that you are taught as a Sith is, because Jedi get their power from effectively self-control and being neutral, tipping them off that neutrality, getting them to give in to their emotions, it gives you the upper hand. And here's a fun fact. In real combat, that's also a very, very useful thing. If you can get your opponent upset and angry, they stop making rational decisions. And if you can keep your head while your opponent is getting angry, you have a major advantage over them. So getting back to tabletop RPGs, it is absolutely invaluable to use those combat scenes as ways to move this story forward. The bad guys should be talking to the good guys, whether it's trying to demoralize them, whether as the things start, as combat starts getting worse and worse for the enemy, you start seeing quote unquote their true colors. One of my favorite things in the world to have in combat is to have an extremely arrogant, condescending, very powerful enemy start fighting the players, and then as the combat goes on, the arrogant, condescending person, as he's losing the upper hand, starts to become more and more unhinged, and he starts taking it personally and starts kind of developing cognitive dissonance in the middle of combat. It's like, you can't be doing this to me. You know, that basically, that thing between Loki and Hulk, it's like, you stupid person, I am a god! I am above you! Puny god. That's something that makes combat interesting, that makes combat fun. At the same time, this is not entirely on GMs to make combat a storytelling place. The players should be talking as well. If you are a player and you are not communicating with the other players in your team, first of all, you are doing yourself a disservice, because in the vast majority of tabletop RPGs, working together can break a lot of systems. Like, everybody thinks about quote unquote breaking the game is you come up with a single build that's amazing and wonderful. Not really. Most games are balanced to the point that you can't make a single break build. And anyone telling you that they have the perfect build to kind of break D&D 5th edition is lying to you. It's not how the game works. However, working together will break. I had a group of players that they were a family. And one of the things, the father of the family was actually one of the DMs that worked for me and would run games at the convention that I helped run. But we were at a different convention. And that was one of the great things about doing the convention circuit, is whether the DM was working for me or not, I knew, I don't even know anymore. I knew probably like 50 or 60 different DMs in the kind of greater Milwaukee, greater Wisconsin area. And we would all, we'd all see each other at other conventions. When I wasn't running, like most of the people that ran the D&D programs for other conventions, I knew all of them. And they all knew me. And we would all go to each other's conventions, and we would help out wherever possible. I remember going to Gamehole Con one year, and I wasn't in any way involved with helping run Gamehole Con. It wasn't my job. I was just there to run a few games, and that was it. And as soon as I walked into the D&D area, it was really, really busy, and I could see my buddy who was running everything was starting to get into the weeds. And so I just walked up and like, hey, dude, what do you need? I wasn't being paid or compensated or anything for it, but that's just how things worked. And I had many, many times with DMs that just come up to me and go, hey, dude, do you need anything? Do you want me to get you a drink or something? Do you want me to, run check-in for a little bit? That was just how we worked. So anyway, getting back to teamwork breaking the game. So this particular family, every time they went to a convention, they would try to have at least one game where they all got to play together using these same characters that they had started at level 1, and now they were, I think this was a tier 3 adventure, so somewhere between 11 and 16. I think they were all like 13 or 14, somewhere around there. But this particular adventure, they had to go into the Underdark, and they had to go into this drow city that had been taken over by fire giants. And their job was to go in and actually capture a fire giant. Which was a process in and of itself, because the monsters and everything that were in this city were powerful enough that if you went in guns blazing, you would TPK the party. So you had to be smart about it. You had to be careful. Well, they had this combination where one of them would cast Wall of Force, and create a cylinder effectively with it that was tall enough that it was taller than what a fire giant could conceivably climb over. And because it was just pure force, there was no handholds or anything. You couldn't like carve it out and climb up. There's nothing that this guy could do. And that's a legitimate way to use the spell, is you can kind of encircle someone with Wall of Force. It's a completely legitimate way to do it. And then the other, they had a druid in the party, and they would just cast Moonbeam. And the Wall of Force was basically just wide enough for the Moonbeam to completely engulf it. And so as long as both of them maintained concentration, and they had basically singled this giant out. So it was just them fighting a single giant, and it completely broke the combat. There was nothing I could do because everything they were doing was completely within the rules. And they weren't trying to abuse a system or anything like that. They just knew their characters really well, and they'd come up with this kind of wombo combo between the characters, and it worked amazingly well. That particular combat was supposed to be the kind of toughest combat, like that was the boss encounter of it. And the difficult thing about that encounter was you weren't allowed to kill the giant, because if they died, you wouldn't be able to take them with you. And so, yeah, getting back to tabletop RPGs, you are doing yourself a huge disservice if you are not constantly communicating with your teammates. And again, if we look to entertainment, like Lancer is meant to emulate the kind of Gundam style combat. And if you've watched any Gundam series, there's tons of them out there. It's been going since the 80s. And they have a new series every like 3 to 5 years. So do the math. There's tons and tons and tons of Gundam series. There is not a single time I have ever watched a combat encounter in Gundam where it's completely silent combat. They're always talking to the enemy. They're talking to their allies. They're having their dude in the chair is feeding them information at the time, telling them about new stuff that's going on. Combat is never silent. So, yeah, the idea that combat stops you from being able to roleplay isn't a good thing. And part of it will be on the GM. If you're not providing situations where your players can roleplay in combat, you're limiting them. However, part of it is on the players. You should be trying to roleplay as much as you can. If you play a pacifist and combat gets rolled, then you should be doing your best to try and stop the combat without bloodshed. I actually created a pacifist character for one of the one-shots that we did during my Realms hiatus for Zelda Universe. And the thing about the character is they never used their action on their turn to attack, ever. It just wasn't what they did. They would use it to heal, and they would use it to kind of buff their allies. They'd never use it to attack. So does that mean that the character was completely useless or completely support? No. See, I built the character to be entirely reaction-based. So if anyone tried to attack me or tried to attack one of my allies, not only could I deflect the attack, I could throw the attack back at the attacker. And because of that, I kind of broke a few of the combat encounters that Elias, one of my players, was running that particular game. And I broke a few of the combat encounters because the enemies couldn't attack any of my allies, because I built the character not only to be able to use reactions to deflect attack, but to also be able to get multiple reactions per turn. So he would need to attack, and my character could move like 30 feet and as part of that reaction every single time. So as long as all of my allies were within about 30 feet of me, I wasn't missing my reactions. Like I was rolling really, really high for my deflections, and then I would just throw it right back at the enemies, and I killed like 3 or 4 different guys without making a single attack. I just deflected all their stuff back at them. Yeah, I can't remember why I went on that to the tangent, but to get back to tabletop RPGs, Good combat should move the story forward. Silent combat should not be the norm. To the point where, again, if all of your combat is silent combat, you're doing yourself a disservice as a GM, because if you do have an instance where the enemy won't speak to your players at all, that can be an incredibly intimidating thing, because it's a change from the norm. If the enemies are always, making jabs at the players and yelling at each other and stuff like that, the players are going to get used to that, and that's going to encourage them to talk with each other as well. And then they just meet these three, like we'll use Lancer, they just meet these three kind of faceless mechs that just show up, and no asking to surrender, no warning them that they're in a place that they're not supposed to be. They just instantly show up and instantly start attacking. And no matter what the players do, these guys never react. There's no communication chatter between any of them. They're ignoring anything from any of the players. They are just three guys that seem to be attacking them. That is an extremely intimidating situation. And after it's over, whether those three guys get away or they're able to destroy all of them and try and take apart their mechs and figure out what's going on, that is going to give them a reason to investigate. Okay, why did this combat actually happen? Because it's different. And it should inspire them to go, what the hell was that about? We have never met these people before. They're not wearing any colors that would identify them as part of a group that doesn't like us. We have to figure out more about why they were here, because obviously there's more to this than just three random faceless mechs showing up. So yeah, like I said, it's a really, really common thing that I see a lot of GMs and players doing is just focusing on, well, when it's combat, and I have to make sure I'm making the right combat moves. And that's just not how you should be playing combat. Combat should tell a story. It should reveal more things about your character. It should reveal things about the enemy characters. Everything. There's so much emotion that happens when you're actually going to blows against someone. It's an extremely emotional time. Having very, very limited experience in actual combat, even I know that once you get to the point where fists start flowing, like, you learn very quickly what kind of a person you are and what kind of person you're fighting is. And it doesn't happen from making the best strategic move. It happens from seeing what choices they decide to make when. And that should be reflected in TTRPG combat. So, interested to hear from you guys. When you are playing a tabletop RPG, any tabletop RPG, is the default silent combat, or are you guys always cracking jokes and stuff like that with the enemies? Are the enemies constantly talking to you as well, or do you normally just do silent combat? And which do you prefer? Do you like silent combat? You like being able to kind of turn off the role-playing part of your brain? Or would you prefer to have combat be more role-playing focused, have more of a purpose than let's see whose numbers go down faster? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.